figure out the incentive structure about whether we can compensate people who create page views with people who have the media rights. Someone Disney sat next to me, and how that all works. And I think one of the things that came out was performance, which is that the blockchain world is not at Instagram scale, which means if all of Instagram is monetized and it's on blockchain, in about 2 seconds, the Bitcoin blockchain will blow up. But the question then becomes, how do we do that? We talked about layering different things. Maybe the title will be in the Bitcoin blockchain, maybe side chains will be the next layer, and then the actual raw records will be in the slightly, maybe still decentralized, but more efficient. So we mentioned media chain, we mentioned big chain DB as a potential approach, building on top of this technology. I'm sure that would come up. But the idea here is that if we want to seriously think about media on the blockchain, we have to deal with transaction through. Like, instead of thinking about media as like, oh, if you don't have the rights, then you cannot access the file, that smells of DRM. But it's really about incentive. If you participate in this value network, if you're getting new audience for the thing, you're getting people to engage with this media, and you're getting advertisers or you're paying money, then you participate in this value chain. If you're Robert Downey Jr. and then you have your Iron Man mask on and you have a photo, someone sees it, you should get paid when someone is like, that's really funny. How do we get people to incentivize them by participating, by declaring the rights and doing those transactions to build this rights network, but in return, money flows back through those channels, those relationships, and allow you to do that. And I think another thing is, how do you get this valuable media onto the blockchain?
So we talked a number of different use cases, and some of which you described, where the idea would be to reward good behavior rather than trying to de-incentivize by hunting someone down, and just leave it at that. So when you were talking about some of the aspects of the artwork itself, there's a lot of wonderful artists out there that are doing interesting work. Those artists should be paid for that, and sometimes there's things where you consider maybe a mashup. And if you wanted to put that within the contract, that way everyone could benefit from a piece of artwork. So an example where you have an actor who's a character, or you have a well-known character that might have had an interesting flair on it, and if it's in keeping with the ethos of a particular company's desires, then there's really no reason why the artist couldn't be rewarded for that, while also continuing to have good actors and the benefits of the IP that a company might want to enforce.
So,
sorry, are you starting a new session?
I am.
Okay. First, do we have any questions about that one?
Any questions about the descriptions we're talking about for asset management, rewarding good behaviors?
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
So my name is Stephanie, and our group really talked about the legal questions that blockchain raises. So we began by kind of putting our thoughts into two fields, which I thought was a good way to kind of begin thinking about the questions that arise. So we had how do we integrate the legal framework that we have now into a blockchain, and how do we validate and bring it into the system? And then the other was, how do we think of things like DOA and new organizations that the blockchain has enabled and created? So one example that we did talk about was the Vermont ruling here, that's evidence statute that was basically saying that information within the Bitcoin system could be used in the Vermont court. So even if Bitcoin were to falter, it would still be legally recognized, the information within the Bitcoin system.
Do you want to add anything?
Yes, quick. So
excuse me, very quickly, a couple of other things where other speakers, we'd asked in the beginning if they had legal issues. Well, one of them related to land and title, and so there was some conversation of different projects that are happening now for blockchain to either trigger, possibly through automated contract, things like closings or notarizations for registries of deeds and so forth. There's some other conversations around that. The other thing was around just how should the law, well, actually another one was the law itself is a primitive, like statutes and regs. And so could we have the statute version on a blockchain as opposed to having to go to Westlaw or LexisNexis under Uniform Electronic Legal Materials Act, for example. So those are some of the, we had a lot of topics. It was good.
Everybody clap. Everybody clap. But not yet, because first we have questions.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions?
Questions?
No? Oh, one question, just a second.
So when you were mentioning the idea of having a statute on blockchain, is it something that you could envision where having particular statutes maybe function as smart contracts? So as soon as perhaps two entities were in a court situation, that if you gave the facts just in a verbal format or checks box, almost like a survey, that their smart contract could weigh it out as if it were a judge saying, you know, boom, just happened. Like you could put in your case, somebody else could put it in their case, and then the smart contract would go, you're in favor of that, weigh it out.
Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, and is your question also would it execute in itself? So right, I mean intuitively I would say definitely, yes. It would, I don't know exactly how the framework looks.
So what are the next steps for what you guys have talked about?
New field of law.
Okay. I, for one, welcome our
Yeah.
new robotic judge overlords. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Moving down. Okay, so our group talked about expressing intellectual property on the blockchain. So I think it's good to understand kind of where this is coming from. Most of the people at our table were pissed off that artists keep getting screwed over. So let me phrase that a bit more delicately. There's this tension between artists feeding their families, people creating intellectual property feeding their families, and the cultural commons. There's this general interest in decentralized expression of intellectual property. One of the really nice things that blockchains enable is they allow large egos to work together. So these large organizations that hold intellectual property rights, it enables them to kind of have a level playing field that they can work together. As many people know, this has been tried many times over. People have tried to do this many times over the last several decades. So what's changed? A number of people have said that there's a shifting economic incentive here. So the existence of YouTube and the algorithmic detection of intellectual property is changing the way some of these larger licensing bodies think. So how do you make this thing happen? Someone said, you know, invent as little as possible, try to piggyback on top of the system that exists right now. And the system that exists now is called DDEX and Plus. So it works for movies, or sorry, it works for music and photographs. The Koala stuff basically maps this stuff to generalized ontology for expression. One of the upsides here is that it has a really nice feedback loop for artists. Artists right now are completely disengaged from who's looking at their content when, how much they should be getting paid, and this would enable that loop to kind of be closed so people get more direct feedback on the things that they create. finally, we had this discussion around, the right to be forgotten, and especially, the right for certain intellectual property rights to be forgotten. There was a discussion around, putting pressure on centralized systems. So how does the European Union do right to be forgotten? They go primarily after the organizations providing mass access to the data. They don't try and delete everything. So, you can't really delete everything on the blockchain, but you can control who gets to see the things that are supposed to be forgotten about, right? So yeah, it was a good conversation. We didn't quite get to the point on how we make the whole thing happen, but it was a definitely good step in a positive direction.
So what are the next steps?
Keep focusing on the Qualis stuff. That seemed to be the stuff that was furthest out in front, and kind of see where that goes.
Any other questions? Hearing none, I would like to clap for Mon.
So we are the table on the IoT use case for blockchain. Bailey and myself, my name is Gurvinder, collectively distinguished participants over here. So I'm going to start with the next steps. Okay, and we'll give you the gory details of the sausage factory. So the first next step is investigating with the genetic sensors API group, and Boaz was advising the group that there is something called the genetic sensors API group in W3C. So doing an investigation and discussion with them, I think, is important for the IoT use case of blockchain. Secondly, developing a grammar for expressing to users. Thirdly, APIs for interacting with devices so that the devices can declare its attributes. So many of these inputs are coming collectively from Boaz and Shields. Then another next step was looking. This is more from me, so sorry for the bias, but I wanted to interject that we look at IoT use case not just as an IoT use case on blockchain, but you begin to see intersections of IoT use case with trade finance. So think about shipment of cargo. There's movement of physical products, which is, think of those as things, as the physical things. But at the same time, there's commercial paper, there are trade documents, finance trade documents. Similarly, Scarlett was here representing representing a bank, and her participation in the table for IoT use case as a bank was what it means for devices to be in a shared economy and autonomous themselves. What does it mean to insurance companies and to banks when you have those kind of situations, similar to how the legal considerations are doing. So you want to share some, Bailey's going to share some.
Yeah, and then I think the questions were just like, are we looking for a solution for a possible next gen architecture, but what does that entail? So is that a private blockchain or is that a public blockchain? And then if you're talking about a private blockchain, does it differ any from a shared database, which I think is a discussion that we have in the blockchain space quite often. And then also, there's just a lot of talk about, if you put this on the blockchain, then we can facilitate all these different trades. But the question becomes, like, what is that actual physical information on the blockchain? And I don't think that was specifically answered, but is that a hash of a certain data? And then what is that data?
Okay, great, thank you. Any questions?
So I don't know what you were referring to, but the devices and sensors working with W3C has a draft called generic sensor. So I don't know if that's what you were referring to. It's called devices and sensors.
Is that the group? Yep.
Everybody clap. Yay! Yay! Isn't it fun to clap? Okay, over here, please.
So we were a combination of archival science and looking specifically about linkages or archival bond to physical assets as well as with logical representations.
I'm sorry, really quickly, can you put that in like 5 words shorter?
Okay, so we're looking at linkages on the blockchain. Let's just go with linkages on the blockchain between blockchain and other data stores.
Thanks.
Okay. So in reflecting on that, we looked at 3 different use cases. So we were looking at LedgerX and commodities, and we were also looking at student record keeping, and finally real estate. So all of those were presented record keeping problems where you had to link back from the blockchain to a physical asset, and then you had different logical representations which you needed linkages. So the problem of linkages we recognize was a big problem, but we didn't necessarily have solutions for that because we recognize it's complicated. We need persistent linkages, and we don't necessarily have the mechanisms for persistent linkages yet. Perhaps some standards, like even the W3C Blockchain ontology can point the direction to that. One of the participants asked, well, what's different about record keeping with the blockchain? And so we talked about that, and in comparison to databases. And basically the idea is that the mechanism for authenticating is separate from the actual object itself, which is different. In databases, they're usually combined together. So we reflected on that a little bit, and the fact that because record keeping on the blockchain is different than other record keeping, there's continuities and discontinuities. Maybe we needed a record keeping standard for record keeping systems on the blockchain that would allow us to be confident that the blockchain record keeping system can be used as proof of a degree, for example, or proof of real estate, and so on. We talked about different models of data models for record keeping. So in particular, we talked about that with real estate. So you could have this idea that the hashed record, the asset representation of the asset is stored off-chain. So that was mentioned earlier. Off-chain representation. You could also have the asset actually represented by attributes which are hashed and put on-chain. So the physical asset is actually on-chain as opposed to off-chain. And then you can have actual smart contracts where the asset having been tokenized, the private key is moved about in various transactions. So transactions of the entity of the asset are on-chain as well. So next steps? You want next steps?
I want next steps.
Okay. Next steps. Well, we moved towards this idea that we need to work on this persistent linkages. We didn't know really how. We think standards could possibly point in the direction. And I think that there's some sense in some of us that a standardized approach could be useful, and also that these are socio-technical systems, so that the institutions and laws have to co-evolve with the technology.
So I have a question. You said that there are these existing communities out there, basically, who have been looking at this, study-wise, or just pragmatic entities that are actually in charge of these things. Do you think that those communities would be interested in coming to the table to discuss these things, either at a workshop or at a community group or something like that, to try to tie these communities together?
Well, I can't speak for all communities, but the community that I can speak for, Interparties Trust, would definitely be interested. In fact, one of the things that I'd like to do is to convene some discussions about these things. So if we can connect, that'd be great.
Any other questions? Okay, and we have one more. And
Right, so supply chain is the last one. It's quite a large problem actually. If you look at it, if a car manufacturer will go down and create an auction to get supply parts P1 with some P1 which can be supplied by S1, S2, S3, and then the network goes further, the P1 could be comprised of parts P11, P12, and so on. So that's one way of the ordering process where the procurement will get involved, and some level of auctioning processes in between, and finally going down to the actual part and the thing that gets produced and that has to get shipped back the whole chain back again to the actual manufacturer of the final equipment. In this particular case, and again one of the key themes, we wanted to focus on the second aspect of it, where the origin of the part, its provenance, and its flow through, how could that be managed in such an area where you would have the parts getting combined into a group of parts that would go into some kind of a container that would get into the logistics mode and start to get shipped, and it would take on the cross-border themes and begin to take on the entire shipment piece and logistics. And this is where we also introduced the IoT concept, where the block could manage its identity, or the original part could have its identity that could be traced across back and forth, and its origins would be known. How does that get manufactured, and all of that could be in a central place, and that gets replicated across some level of blockchain type of nodes, and you can trace that back through. Its composition could come through into a container like shipment, where you would have smart containers with intrusion detection, inventory management, all facilitated through a smart contract running across a blockchain. And that would go into the LC financing centric themes, where the shipping from one side to the other side could be managed over a cross-border non-correspondent banking payment system, which would utilize the similar smart sensors and smart IoTs on the other side that could check and make sure that the entire chain is managed appropriately and finally make the payments. So that's the dream theme that we talked about. On the next step side, we really have to break it down into some of the pieces. Some of the IoT-centric, API-centric themes could come in handy in terms of standardizing that. Some of the parts-centric themes could come in handy, and a standardization on the shipping side could come in handy to be able to make that happen, and its connection into the banking cross-border financing-centric themes and the regulations and standardization. So it's a very large problem, but I do believe pieces of that can be taken in, solved, and moved forward. That's on the supply chain.
Any questions?
Very good, thank you.
Okay, folks, we've reached an inflection point. We, of course, took too long to do everything, and that's all my fault because I made the schedule. What we are scheduled to do right now is blockchain primitives and APIs. I don't know about you. I fried. I would like to be fresh for that topic. I'd like to pick it up tomorrow and sort of merge that in kitchen sink. What do you guys think? Is anybody here who's going to be angry about that? Disappointed, not able to attend? Wendy?
Wonder, do we have some people who are here today who won't be here tomorrow, or people who are going to be leaving early tomorrow and want to make sure that subjects that they're interested in are addressed, that they're able to participate in those discussions?
So we've got blockchains, the bits that could be standardized in 5 minutes. Madhu's warning. We've got Samsung Internet, etc. Manesh. We've got IPFS project, etc. Juan. We've got REST-JSON-based standardized blockchain receipts. We've got interface between consensus and application state, enabling programming languages. Ethan from the big table. Smart signatures. And smarter signatures, Chris and team, Christopher, building the infrastructure of future decentralized web. Help me with the pronunciation. Not Utah. Utah and colleague. We have that's it.
So that's way more than would have fit in a normal session. I'm going to ask that anybody doing a thing tomorrow, let us know how much minimally you need for your talk. If you can talk to me and Daza. If we can do a lightning talk in 3 minutes, that's better. If you need the full 5 minutes, that's fine. But let's just, and so we're going to kind of mix this in kitchen sink. Here's what I'm going to propose. I'm going to propose, so right now it is 4 o'clock. I'm going to propose that we go on a 15-minute break